Welcome to this presentation of the Rotary Club of North Bethesda, Maryland, USA. Our club was established in 1974. We meet every Friday morning at 7:45 a.m., and we often invite guest speakers to give presentations on all kinds of interesting subjects. Please contact us through our website at nbrotary.org. And thanks for watching. Our speaker today is Louis Campion. He is the president and CEO of the Maryland Motor Truck Association, a 1,000-member trade association dedicated to supporting and advocating for a safe, efficient, and profitable trucking industry. As Chief Executive Officer, he is responsible for directing the day-to-day operations of the association and serving as the primary advocate for Maryland's trucking industry before state and local government officials. Now here's Louis Campion.
So, what's happening in the trucking industry, a little background about us that was already mentioned. So we are the state trade association of the trucking industry. We were founded in 1935, so we are more than 85 years old. We do have approximately 1,000 member companies at this time. That actually puts us in the top 5 in the country. There is a state trucking association in all 50 states. And we're really proud of the fact that in such a small state like Maryland, that our members find enough value in our organization that we have such a strong membership number. And really the highlight, I think, about who we are and who we represent is that trucking means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? It's dump trucks, it's long-haul tractor trailers, it's your local box trucks delivering to small stores, it's intermodal operations at the Port of Baltimore, for example. And our members range from single truck owner operators, one gentleman or woman who gets in their truck every single day, drives it themselves, up to the largest international companies in the world. I mean, Lars already mentioned his ties with Volvo, in fact, and his son's ties with Volvo. And Volvo is a member of ours. UPS is a member of ours. FedEx is a member of ours. But overwhelmingly, we are a small industry. We're an industry that, more than 90% of the industry is 20 trucks or fewer. So while we know the big name companies, the industry is overwhelmingly small. And we've got a lot of issues. So this is a list of not all-inclusive issues that we have that we are working on currently, and I promise you I will not talk about every one of these issues this morning. But, it's interesting how they change, everything from driver shortages to taxes to congestion-related issues to tolling issues. And if you had asked me 2 months ago to put together a list of issues, the first one on that list, if you can see it, fuel costs, which you all were just mentioning, about the state exemption from the fuel tax over the last 30 days. Fuel costs wouldn't have even made it on the list probably 2 months ago because we had very steady, consistent diesel fuel prices over the past few years, and then obviously the the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has certainly impacted that as well as a few other things. And now it's probably the number one issue on people's minds as it pertains to day-to-day operations, because it really impacts, obviously your bottom line, your cash flow. You're having to pay to put fuel in your truck today, and then ultimately you might not get paid for 30, 60, even 90 days for a load. So a lot of issues happening in trucking. Again, I'm just going to highlight some of the biggest ones, certainly be available for any questions about anyone that you might want to particularly discuss. Hopefully you'll walk away from this saying, why do I care? Why do I care what's happening in trucking? And maybe understand that a little bit more. And ultimately, we are the dominant means of moving freight in this country. And nationally, we move 70% of all freight. In Maryland, even more so when you look at manufactured freight. 96% of manufactured freight in Maryland moves on a truck. And this next statistic on 93% exclusive community dependence is one that I think really illustrates the importance of our industry and how impactful we are on citizens' lives. So when we say 93% exclusive community dependence, that means that 93% of Maryland communities have no other way to get their goods. They have no water access, they have no rail access, they have no airport access, for example. So everything that they have comes on a truck at some point in time. We are a major employer in the state, over 115,000 employees. To put it in perspective, that's 1 out of every 17 employees in the state, and we pay over $6 billion in wages. We commonly like to say, if you bought it, a truck brought it, again, illustrating that community dependence. But also, we often don't think about how do goods get to our grocery stores? How do they get to our retail outlets? And now even how do they get to our homes with the rise in e-commerce? And I'll talk a little bit about that. So if you bought it, a truck brought it. So this is a chart that I know not everyone may be able to see, particularly if you're in person. I'm just going to highlight the important components of it. And this is an annual study that is done by an organization that does a lot of trucking industry research called the American Transportation Research Institute. And they put out surveys to thousands of trucking companies across the country every year. This was released last October, asking them about their top industry issues. Overwhelmingly for us, what has come back year after year is that a shortage of truck drivers is our #1 issue. If you can see this, the top 3 issues are all driver related. Driver shortage, driver retention, driver compensation. But driver shortage actually received more than 4 times as many first place votes as the second place issue, which is driver retention. And honestly, those are very intertwined issues as well. So, we like to say it's all about the driver, and it truly is. The driver is, without a doubt, our most valuable asset and our most difficult one to find. So I want to talk a little bit about that and how it impacts you. So how bad is the driver shortage? So before the pandemic, the American Trucking Associations had a driver shortage estimate at roughly 63,000 drivers. Now, 2 years later, after the pandemic, that driver shortage is in excess of 80,000 drivers, and projected by 2023, just next year, to exceed 100,000 drivers. I can tell you that that is absolutely the #1 issue for Maryland's trucking industry as well. Last fall, I surveyed our board of directors. Our board is about 40 members, but it's not all trucking companies. It also includes some allied industry members and the like who are offering products or services to the trucking industry. And so our 22 board members who operate trucks, I asked them one single question, which was, how many drivers could you use tomorrow if you could find them? And it was 650 drivers across those 22 companies. So almost an average of 30 drivers per company. Just shows you how much demand there is for the truck driver today. And for all CDL drivers, you may have heard at the beginning of the school year, when schools resumed after the pandemic, many schools were having a difficult time providing transportation to school from home because they couldn't find bus drivers. So they're struggling with those same industry issues. And I'll talk a little bit about why is that. Right? One is average age. We have an older population that makes up the trucking industry in reality. The average driving age is in excess of 50. And, we have had a lot of retirements throughout the pandemic. The other piece of age that I'll touch on is how early can you get into this industry. So there have been barriers that really prevent you from getting into the industry until you're at least 21 years old. Some of those are being lifted, but the combination of challenges with getting younger people into the industry, coupled with retiring of the older population that has been a large segment of our driving population, has really exacerbated this. lifestyle. So trucking is not for everyone, right? It is a difficult, challenging, hardworking lifestyle. Certainly at the beginning, when you first come out of school, your likely first job is going to be over-the-road trucking, because there are a lot of insurance challenges with local driving until you get a little bit of experience. But like any job, when you first come out of college or school, right, you take a job that may not be the most attractive job, you build skill, you have a safe driving record, and then the opportunities are really boundless for you in this industry to come back to driving locally. If you don't want to be over the road, some people are not cut out for being away from home for long periods of time. So that is certainly a challenge. Salary. I would suggest to you that salary for truck driving is lower than it should be. Certainly it was before the pandemic, for the level of responsibility that drivers have, for the safety that we ask them to maintain. However, one of the outcomes of the shortage really has been rapid escalation of driver salaries, which is a contributing factor to the inflation that we are seeing. The average salary, not the average salary, excuse me, Walmart, for example, just announced salaries for drivers at $110,000 a year to start. So the opportunity to really make a good living in trucking without going to college, with roughly 3 months of training where you can get a CDL and really get out there and make a good living, is one that exists. But historically, over the past 20 years, those salaries haven't kept pace in a way that they should have. Regulations. So we are a heavily regulated industry, both at the state and federal level. Everything from mandatory drug and alcohol testing that drivers must go through hours of service limitations, mandatory rest breaks, all types of different things that are designed to achieve safety on the highways, right? Those are important components. Background checks, things of that sort, are all things that can be a discouragement to people who are trying to enter the trucking industry. We find, and I'll talk, actually, I don't know if I have a slide on it, a full slide, but I talked briefly about cannabis legalization. No matter where you stand on the legalization of recreational cannabis, and I happen to have a more conservative approach on that, there's no doubt that attracting younger people into our industry, that is a barrier, because you are not able to use cannabis under any circumstances if you want to be a commercial truck driver. So, all of those are factors. And then what I like to call Uber competition. So, we have Uber, we have Lyft, we have Amazon, typically operating vehicles that are not considered commercial motor vehicles because of their size. So they aren't subject to all of the same rules and regulations that trucking is. And so, now I have an opportunity where I can go drive for one of those types of entities. I likely don't need a commercial driver's license, so I don't have to go through all of the regulatory hoops. And ultimately, I can operate just in my passenger car, and that is clearly taking away from driver opportunities at the commercial level for freight. And then the last thing I'll say, this is my own illustration, is frightened parents as another barrier. So I have 4 kids, but 2 of them are actually of driving age. One is 17, one is 16, neither of which has their driver's license yet. They both have their permits. And I will tell you, for any of you who have kids, I imagine your experience was somewhat similar, but it was just very harrowing the first few times I took them out onto the roadway. I'm gripping the side of the car handle. I'm thinking, am I going to survive this? In fact, the driver's ed school that my daughter went through was taught by a former state police officer. And he was telling us that he hired another retired state police officer to work with him, and that officer lasted 1 day on the job because it was so harrowing for him driving with all of these new drivers. He just couldn't take the stress. So, if you have parents like me who really believe in driving and trucking and the like, and really even struggling with overcoming just getting a standard driver's license. How do we ever get somebody to a CDL is certainly a challenge. So just a little personal experience there. So what's being done? There actually is a great deal being done about driving and trying to encourage driving as a career option, because there's recognition at the federal level and at the state level that, you know, as trucking goes, so goes our economy. And if we can't move goods, we can't grow our economy. So actually, in the last federal reauthorization bill in Congress, they actually passed a pilot program that allows for 18 to 20-year-old drivers to operate across state lines, what we call interstate freight. And let me explain that a little bit. So every state allows an individual to get a commercial driver's license at the age of 18, but they can only operate wholly within your state lines, and they can only move what's considered intra-state freight. That means the freight originated in your state, was manufactured, for example, in that state, and is destined for ultimate delivery in that state. As you might imagine, that's a very limited amount of freight. Virtually nothing is actually produced in Maryland and ends up at final point of destination in Maryland. And when you're also talking about such a small state where, you know, you can drive virtually 1 hour in every direction and you are crossing a state line, that barrier has been a big one for us. In states like Texas or California, I can drive in some directions for 3 days and never cross state lines. But clearly in smaller states, that's not the case. So what they did at the federal level to try and overcome that is that they have authorized a pilot program over the next 3 years that allows for 3,000 18 to 20-year-old drivers to haul interstate freight and operate across state lines. That comes with a number of other safety provisions, technologies that you must have on your vehicle, for example, additional training requirements, because everybody wants to operate safely. I know if I'm running my car next to a truck, but I want to make sure that driver is operating safely. And we believe that that can be done with that additional training and with those proper safety technologies. And the hope is that we will demonstrate success with that will allow for expanded opportunities for 18 to 20-year-olds through this pilot program. President Biden actually announced an apprenticeship program just a few months ago that we actually have one company in Maryland who's already taking advantage of that, which is DM Bowman in Western Maryland out in the Williamsport area. So from where you guys are, right up the sort of 270 corridor, and you'll hit the Bowman area. The other piece is it really is encouraging outreach to women, and I'll show you a slide in a few minutes on how many female CDL holders do we actually have in Maryland, and really looking at best practices on driver retention. You may hear a lot about the driver turnover rate, and in long-haul industry sectors, driver turnover is very high. But what's misrepresented about that turnover rate is that driver turnover doesn't mean the driver left the trucking industry. It meant in many cases that they left their particular company to pursue other opportunities with other companies. And right now the driver demand is so high that drivers can clearly do that. We've seen some companies that had 3 pay increases last year. They offer large signing bonuses to attract drivers. And so that's a real challenge because it's moving drivers between companies, but it's not growing the pool of drivers. So these efforts on this slide really are trying to grow the pool of drivers. CDL, so commercial driver's license schools, are really exploding right now. One of the schools, we actually work with Montgomery College. I know you guys are in North Bethesda, but one of our schools is the Community College of Baltimore County as well. Montgomery does have a great driving school, primarily for straight trucks, because they serve a lot of WMATA needs. At CCBC in Baltimore County, they shared with me last September that they had projected enrollment at about 150 students over this school year. and they had 270 students who had applied for their program. I talked with them just last week, and they said they actually cannot accept any more students into their program in the next year because they have exploded so much with capacity. So this is great, right? It's an opportunity to see people coming in to this industry. And we are on the verge, in a partnership with Williamsport High School, of launching the first high school program in Maryland that will kick off this fall, that will allow students in their senior year of high school to take an elective course that is very hands-on, training them around truck driving and prepping them to take their commercial learner's permit test immediately upon graduation. And then they will feed into a CDL program at Hagerstown Community College, which has a great training program there. I'll stop for a minute. I know virtually it's not necessarily conducive to questions, but if anybody wanted to ask a question or you just wanted to wait till the end, I'd be happy to manage that either way.
I have a question on
Sure.
driver compensation. At least I'm wondering if you think this is a major issue or if it's being misrepresented in the press. But I read that drivers are only paid by the mile. So if they have to wait for 6 hours for their trailer to be unloaded, that's time on their own time. This seems a strange disincentive. You know, is anything being done about that, or is that an accurate description?
Sure. So the answer is it depends, but we do believe that that is a major issue for drivers, no matter how you're paid. And it's a great question, so let me explain. There really are three ways that drivers can be compensated typically. Some drivers are paid by the hour, most commonly local delivery type drivers, right? Or your package delivery services like UPS, FedEx, those types of drivers. They are frequently paid by the hour. You have drivers that are paid by the load. Right? A lot of independent contract drivers, for example, would be paid by the load because it's just a flat rate that they would be paid to deliver. You know, here's how much the load pays, and they determine whether or not they want to accept that load or not. By the mile, you are correct that there are industry segments that do pay by the mile as well, frequently in the long haul or regional haul segments. And detention is a terrible problem for our industry. Unfortunately, you know, we don't get to control when a truck is loaded or unloaded. And so that is at the really mercy of the receiver. It's also one of the reasons why when we've tried to look at things like encouraging truck traffic overnight, one of the factors to try and alleviate congestion and maximize efficiency, one of the challenges is it depends on if your shipper or your receiver will accept a load at night. So detention actually costs our industry billions of dollars in lost time because you are subject to hours of service limits and you are on duty while you're sitting there waiting. And in certain industry segments, you are absolutely correct. Their pay scale model is based on miles traveled, not miles sitting. Or even more commonly, if you accept a by the load type of scenario, like an independent contract driver, and let's say a load paid $1,000, just as a nice round number. Okay, that load pays the $1,000. That driver, if he's sitting for 3 or 4 hours waiting, he's not getting any more for that load, right? And so in effect, that wait time is preventing him from being able to take that next load. So that is absolutely a challenge.
Can I jump in with a question?
Yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, I was reading in the newspaper yesterday about the governor of Texas sending a lot of immigrants from Texas up to the Washington Capitol. Have you considered reaching out to these new immigrants to try to they need jobs, they're going to need jobs. Driving a truck would strike me as something that would be feasible if they go through the training program and make it. Are you into that? Is really the question.
No, absolutely. That is a great question as well. And yes, actually, there's a lot of outreach, particularly to the Hispanic community about driving opportunities, also to Eastern Europeans. And actually, we were contacted by a church locally that was helping with Afghan refugees and had received a number of Afghan refugees in this area, and they were just looking for jobs. They want to work, and they really aren't being provided with the support services from the government once they are placed somewhere from a housing standpoint. And so absolutely, that's something we're looking at, not just for driving jobs, but there are a lot of shortages. As you know, every industry, right, has a help wanted sign pretty much right now, but warehousing, manual labor, household goods moving, which doesn't require you to go through the process of getting a CDL necessarily, or can be a building block to you getting a CDL, but getting you gainful employment. So absolutely.
Yeah, great.
Sure. Any other questions? I'll move on to my next slide. If not.
I have a question, kind of a personal thing. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Okay, so
yes,
I have a little weekend house on the Eastern Shore, and it's a very quiet neighborhood. And one of our neighbors works for an egg wholesaler in Kent County, and he loads his truck up. It's a 53-foot gigantic trailer, and parks it in the neighborhood with the refrigeration system running all night long, and it drives everyone nuts. So I noticed parking is an issue. Where should he park? He claims that he saves 2 hours by loading up and then coming home and parking the truck.
Yeah, so in part the question is, does he own that truck?
No,
Yeah,
no, we checked. The truck is owned by the company. The wholesale.
Okay, because if he owns the truck, he's still subject to, for example, if you have an HOA or some type of community rules that prevent parking, he would still be subject to those. But one of the big challenges for guys who own their own truck is that's frequently their transportation to and from work and the like, and as well. And so, that doesn't come into play in this particular instance. You're right. So he's really using his truck in something that's called the furtherance of a commercial enterprise by driving it essentially loaded to whatever, to his home from his terminal. So really, he's on duty during that time period. That does become a little bit more questionable around things like how that impacts his hours of service limits, because that time that he travels would be considered on-duty time. I appreciate very much both sides of this challenge, right, that he probably has nowhere to park his truck nearby, but also that we don't want trucks parking in neighborhoods, right? That's just the reality, and it is a tremendous problem.
Okay, you have 5 minutes left.
Yes.
I have one question. Is the trucking industry workers are unionized? They have unions, or are they not allowed to have unions?
So the trucking industry, I hear we only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to move really quick, is not overwhelmingly unionized. It was up until 1981 because it was a regulated industry, but then just like the airline industry, it was deregulated then. President Carter signed a deregulation act, and then essentially you do have unionized companies, but the large majority of the industry is not unionized. Company, for example, UPS is unionized, FedEx is not, right? So I'll move really quickly. This just gives you a sense of male versus female CDL. We're roughly 12% female, so that's a population that we really need to reach out to. This sort of talks a little bit about drivers and trucks. We talked about the shortage of drivers. We are having an equally difficult challenge with regards to trucks themselves. Right, just like cars, where demand is through the roof and price is also through the roof, Truck prices have gone up 82% year over year. No customer is getting their new truck orders completely filled. Orders are taking in excess of a year to fill. And why does this matter? It means we can't add capacity. It means warehouses are full and we can't empty them, right? And inevitably, that contributes to the supply chain challenges that we're all having and the inflation and cost of goods going up. I will mention a few things around emissions mandates. This is probably the biggest issue outside of drivers and equipment that we currently face. Now, I think everybody recognizes that and wants clean air, and there is continued pressure on all industries to reduce greenhouse gases. President Biden actually just announced the next federal low NOx rule, nitrous oxides, to reduce pollutants from trucks. Pollutants from trucks have actually been dramatically reduced. Most people don't understand that. A 1988 truck, for example, one 1988 truck emitted as much as 60 trucks do today. But there is a continued pressure to go to what we call zero emission vehicles, electric trucks, hydrogen powered trucks. California has adopted that. Excuse me. New York, New Jersey, all recently passed mandates for electric trucks. We had a proposal in Maryland to do that did not pass. But the problem with electric trucks is it is not like an electric car. There is no charging in Maryland for an electric truck. Unlike a car, which can be plugged in to a wall outlet in your garage, the power demands are much different. The operating limits. I can drive on diesel fuel between 1,750 miles and 2,000 miles between fill-ups in a tractor trailer. I can only go 250 to 300 miles between charges in an electric vehicle, given battery range. They're not widely available at this point in time. The cost is 2 to 3 times as high, and it takes me 15 minutes to fill up a diesel vehicle, yet it takes me in excess of 2 hours to charge an electric truck. To give you some context, the electric power for one tractor equals the power needs for 134 homes. So the grid capacity is a major issue that has to be resolved before we can widely adopt these. So this, I think, is one of the biggest discussions that our industry will face in the future. And then this is my last slide. We talked about parking and that electric truck piece, so to tie that to that. So this is national data. We have 313,000 spaces across the country for trucks. And we have 3.5 million truck drivers. And that inevitably is the problem. It's why you find trucks parked in your communities at times. It's also why electrification is not a realistic option for us, because if we can't give us a slab, if we can't get a driver a piece of asphalt to park on, how are we going to give him a charging station? So that is an inevitable problem. Cannabis legalization, we do not have a position on cannabis legalization. It remains prohibited under federal law for commercial motor vehicle drivers. Our concern is with safety. If you look at the crash rates in those states that have legalized marijuana, what has happened is you have seen in excess of 10% increases in the crash rate in those states for all vehicles, not just trucks. So, that is a major concern. And then the last thing I'll mention is autonomy. A lot of conversation about autonomy, autonomous trucks. We don't believe that autonomous vehicles are going to replace the need for the driver. The driver performs a lot of functions beyond just driving. We think it will be a major assistance program for the driver. It will improve driver lifestyle. It will improve driver safety, right? But ultimately, there may be some segments that are able to have true autonomy, particularly long haul, but when you come off of the interstate system, you're going to need a driver to operate that vehicle, right? There are a lot of tests. We actually have legalized platooning in Maryland. Platooning is where you have 2 trucks. Only the front truck has a driver that's operating. The driver behind is in a vehicle sitting there electronically tethered. but there's a lot still to come with societal acceptance before you would see any rapid scale adoption. Again, our driver needs are dramatic, and there's just no way to meet those with autonomy. So with that, if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to take them. I know many of you have jobs you have to get to, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
We can carry the questions after we officially close. Thank you very much for an interesting talk on trucks.
Very interesting.
You didn't mention what the drone might do to trucking industry. Another good question.
Yeah, I don't know how realistic drone delivery is. There actually are small robots now that companies like Amazon, like FedEx are using for localized package delivery. I have seen some of those, but you know, we'll see how rapidly that's adopted. So.
Very good presentation, very informative.
Very,
very good. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all very much. I appreciate the invitation. Have yourselves a great holiday weekend.
Thank you. Very good call.
Thank you, you too.
Take care. You bet.
Thank you.